What's up, everybody? Noble Comics here, and I want to talk about action scenes. Now, as you know, I'm a comic fan, I'm an anime fan, and one of the main reasons that I like this stuff is because it's very action-packed, dynamic, and cool. The action scenes really sell it. And whenever you think about stuff like comic books, for example, that's usually one of the first things that come to your mind, right? Superheroes, and what do superheroes do? They fight. But I've been reading less and less mainstream comics from Marvel and DC over the years, and I've been reading more independent comics, and I've been reading more manga. And something that I've really noticed is that the action scenes and fight scenes in comic books, most of the time, pretty much suck, or they're not good. Even the best comics, the most highly acclaimed comics, everything like that, the action is usually bad. And I'll get into this in full detail of what I'm talking about. But I want to talk about first why I think this is the case. I want to talk about what's the difference between comic book action and, say, manga action. And then I want to get into some details and some examples of what I'm talking about here. So first, what do I think comic book action is, or just comic book storytelling in general? Well, I think that whenever they are actually fighting, first thing is that there is a very bad showing of the scale of power. Right, like somebody's hitting somebody, and it looks the exact same if Thor's hitting Superman as it does of like Tom hitting Joe, right? There's not like a big scale of action that you normally get with manga. Usually the backgrounds are removed for these, so you don't even get a scale of like the environment being impacted by their shots. Characters typically in comics feel heavier, like they're more weighty and more durable, which can make characters seem stronger, kind of at best, but it can make them seem, again, weaker at the very worst, because they're sort of being treated like a regular human would be treated if they were fighting. But the biggest thing about it, though, is that comic book action is mostly just posing. It's just two characters striking a pose, the artist is flexing their anatomy skills, and it doesn't even look like they're actually in combat most of the time. They're just hitting a pose that looks really nice, but for an action scene is very boring. It's like a static image. It's not fluid. It's not dynamic. There's not as much emotion or anything like that. We don't really get to see, like in manga, whenever a big hit happens, right? It's like, first of all, there's the wind up where we're seeing the hit about to happen. Then you see the hit once, maybe it's like closer up, but you see them get hit. You see your main character's reaction as they're hitting them. You see the enemy's reaction as they're getting hit. You see different people's reaction, just bystanders whenever they're watching the hit, and they're all shocked about how strong it is. And then you see the hit again as the character's being launched, and maybe it's zoomed out, and you see the environmental impact of the character, smashing through the city. It's like you see the hit like 10 times. So you really get the feeling that this is impactful. Versus in comics, usually you see the hit once, and like a setup for a big hit, take Superman when he defeated the World Forger. Like it all happens all on one page pretty much, and you don't even get to see the hit happen. It's totally different when it comes to storytelling, I guess, and that's because I think comic books are way more focused on the narrative, where manga is more focused on the action. And I know comics is very all-encompassing for every genre and everything, and manga has every genre of manga. But you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like Batman, Superman, Daredevil, mainstream comics, and I'm talking about Naruto, Goku, One Punch Man, mainstream anime and manga. Because with comics, a lot of the times when it comes to a fight, it's like there's a story that we're working through, and the conclusion to the story narrative will be through some talking and storytelling and resolution. And a fight is just like a way to get there. Like we're going to defeat the main villain because he's in the way, and then we're going to resolve the story. Versus it seems like in manga more often than not, defeating the main villain is the resolution of the story. That's where your emotional impact is. It's defeating this guy, like Goku, Jiren, Kakashi, Obito. Like that is the actual conclusion. There's not some panels, to tell us how we should feel about it or anything like that after the fact, but you get all the time in comics. And you'll even get that while they're fighting. The screen will be covered in text while they're fighting. And like I said, I'll get in full detail of this in a little bit. Because, again, It's just posing. They're just posing two characters, and a lot of the times the worst thing that I hate the most about comic book action is the like crossed arms phenomenon. And this is like especially apparent with Hulk that I've seen, where it's two characters are fighting, but their punch just looks like it's like sliding off of each other, like they're crossing their arms and they're sliding off of each other. It's ridiculous. That's like, how is that exciting or awesome or fun or dynamic? You don't look at that and you're like, whoa, like when Goku's punching Jiren in Ultra Instinct. That's like a whoa shot. This stuff is just like, are you supposed to be like, oh, look at the fine intricacies on his bicep muscle? You know, it feels like that is the appeal. That's what we're looking at. But don't worry, because there'll be a text box that says something like, universes were shattered at the blow. You know, because most of the feats you get here are like from a text box, from what you're seeing on screen, because they don't actually show it a lot of times, versus in manga, they're very good at showing what's going on. And it may have something to do, like I'm saying, it's very narrative focused, but comics almost feel sort of like a soap opera, where it's very dramatic and there's like some action or tense scenes, but it's all this dramatic narrative that's being taken care of, right? Versus in manga, it is a bigger scope of the impact of what's going on, a better scale of power, which is like any Saitama fight, you get a great scale of his power. Like whenever Vegeta shoots a blast and you see it go off of planet Earth, like you know how powerful that is. Kenpachi cutting down that skyscraper. You just get a scale that they are very powerful. And like I said, you see the hit multiple times. And Jackie Chan talks about this when he's making his movies in China. Is that you have to show the hit multiple times so that it feels like a real hit. But in America, filmmaking, right, you only show it once, if at all. Also, in manga, you know, whenever they're like super powered, it's like the hype moment where they're going in for the final blow. Think of like Luffy versus Kaido. You know, there's like that perspective shift, like that fishbowl type look where the perspective is shifting. The style itself is like more scratchy, like the raw power is actually changing the art or the page itself. There's a great sense of speed and motion. And again, there's so much emotion from the character and the villain. You see it on their face. Again, before the hit, during the hit, after the hit. You see it on everybody's face, like, wow, this was really impressive. And comic or manga characters in general are able to get flung around a little bit more, right? So it's like, you know, a person can get hit across the city or across the island at greater just linear speed than you see in comics typically. And like I mentioned, again, the fights here are the resolution to the story. That is the emotional ending, or at least to whatever main story or mini story. Like think about when Guts is fighting Bascon in Berserk. So you have this very powerful guy, leader of the enemy army. He's like the toughest person we've come across so far. He and Guts are trading blows back and forth. Guts' sword breaks. It looks like he's going to lose. But in the end, he manages to kill him. And like, we don't need a dialogue box saying like, and his army was shattered and they had to retreat. Or anything like that. Like, seeing him kill him, like that was the emotional ending to that encounter. That story is over, right? And it's the same thing with like Goku versus pretty much any villain. And also, what you see a lot of the times is these big action scenes, like very few panels per page. It's like just big image of like one hit, big image of another hit, next page. Which is probably why these fights take like 30 chapters, because like each page is pretty sparse, but you get that big impact. Versus like some comics, I mean, there's a comic I really like called Do a Power Bomb, where the action is actually really good, but they put like 12 panels on a page. And the way that they do it is not bad. Like, it's still impactful, but it's nowhere near like this level. It's probably the best way that comics can do it their way, still not to this level. And again, I hate whenever comic book action gets rid of the background, so it's just like a blank background. And look, I make comic books. I know I do the same thing sometimes for action scenes. And my action that I do, or that I pay somebody to do, I think the action's very good. It's very fluid. It's very dynamic. But the backgrounds do get lost sometimes. But when it comes to manga, the backgrounds are there in full detail. Or at least there's less empty space. which I think does add to that sense of scale that does help them. And so now I want to get into some specific details, or specific examples, I should say, of stuff that I kind of like and don't like, some different comic book panels here. So first one you see here, this is Batman punching Superman. This is from the Hush storyline. And this is exactly what I'm talking about, where it's like from a artist perspective, it's like, well, that's very well, that's good perspective, and that's the 2/3 rule. It's looking quite nice. The posing here is very good. Batman's form looks very good. Superman's form looks very good. But it's not very dynamic. Like that, I feel like it's not bad by any means. Like none of this is actually like bad or horrible to look at, but it doesn't do anything for me. This is one of my favorite comic book scenes. This is where Namor turns on Thanos and he punches Thanos in the chin, busts his lip or whatever. And again, that's a cool moment, but it's relatively boring. Like that's a big moment where Namor's turning on Thanos, he's punching him in the face, actually doing damage. And it does get about half the page, but it's not selling the impact to me. Daredevil's got a ton that are just bad, where, again, it's just like him posing and then a guy behind him is falling over, and you're like, okay, I guess he got hit right there. Sure. Another good example of that is here where Hulk's fighting Hyperion. They're both just posing, they're like nowhere near each other, and we're supposed to think this is some intense action scene. And then I want to talk about some of the best comic books, right, that highly regarded. Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen, Batman Year One, and TMNT The Last Ronin. All of these have something very in common, and that's they're all highly acclaimed comics. People really like them. I really like them as well. But whenever you think about these books, you don't think about any of the action scenes. You think about the narrative, right? And so these books don't have the best action. Like Watchmen, the emotional ending of Watchmen, right, is Dr. Manhattan exploding Rorschach, which is a cool scene, but as far as like an action scene or an obliteration goes, it was extremely tame. Like if that was a manga who had done that, it would have been way more dynamic and impactful and visceral, but it wasn't about the action, it was about the narrative that was being told. Same thing when it comes to Batman Year One with Commissioner Gordon beating up Flash. It's like very obviously not the most dynamic fight scene, but it does a very good job of serving its purpose of narratively moving the story, showing the capabilities of Jim Gordon, that he's a good cop. There's a ton of text overlaid with the action, because you're not really supposed to be impacted by the action. It's just about the narrative. And same thing, even Dark Knight Returns, where you have Batman versus Superman, that big fight, which was impactful, I think, because Batman's winning. But even the big hit panels, which are not bad, they're all like Jack Kirby-esque posing, like How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. And Frank Miller's obviously an amazing artist, one of the best. But it's not very dynamic, I would say. Maybe more so than some of these other ones, but not super dynamic. And even Invincible, which is one of the, rising stars in comics because of the TV show, where it's this brutal, action-packed narrative, even their action scenes, which can be pretty awesome, right, are usually riddled with, like, paragraphs of dialogue, and is clearly more focused on the narrative than the action. And this is one piece in particular that I think exemplifies everything that I'm talking about, what I don't like about American comic book action. So I actually saw this, and this was one of the things that made me want to do this video. And you look at this and you think, well, what's wrong with it? The art looks nice, and sure, the art is fine. What's wrong with this image? And again, this image is everything that's wrong with American comic book action. Now, we do have the ground on the bottom, which looks nice. We have some rocks and dust flying around. But we've got no background. We've got text all over the screen, from no thank you to the from the other chick getting punched. We have all this crap text at the bottom that nobody cares about. This is Tom King who wrote this. This is Wonder Woman's run by Tom King. And Tom King's a retard. He's a bad writer. And he's trying to do this writing thing that Scott Snyder does, or it's like some lore of the world that's tying into the scene we're seeing right now. But it's stupid, and nobody cares about it, and nobody cares about Wonder Woman, which I've talked about in another video. And again, all of this text and crap that's on here is all narrative. when everything it's saying of like the no thank you to the this is a tale of a woman who's been pushed to the ground and how she rose again. All of that can be said through the punch. You don't need the text to handhold you. All of this emotional stuff they're trying to do, that can be told through the action. You don't need another text box telling you about it. But again, no background. The big onomatopoeia in the background is not bad. Again, the form looks nice. The posing's good. But the enemy here that's getting punched in the face is totally whack. This whole thing is so bad because the stars around the face, there's too much happening other than the scene itself with the stars and the text and everything. Get rid of all of it. But she's getting punched, but look at her body. It's just limp, like it's just going to drop to the ground at her feet. There's no sense of impact that she's going to get flung back from this mighty punch or anything, because look at her arm. Her arm is fully extended. It's fully extended, punching her in the face. She's not like punching through her opponent to throw her back or have any sort of actual cool, impactful scene. Her arm is fully extended, punching her in the nose. She's just going to flop to the ground. I have no clue why she's off the ground, right? Why she's like, a few inches off the ground. Where's that height coming from? Other than the fact that it's a cool looking shot. And sure, at a glance, it's cool looking, but there's so much here that's wrong and not done well, and I don't like it. I don't like it at all. And again, the actual art, like the anatomy and the posing and everything, is fine, but this is not a good action shot. And look, there's so many more bad comic book action scenes. I'm not going to go through every single one. I do want to talk about some ones that I like, though, that do some of the things that comic books do well, which I said is like showing weight. This shot here of Blue Marvel hitting the Hulk, I really like. It shows his power quite well. Hulk's got a great expression on his face. I love that shockwave feel. You can really feel the speed and the power of the punch. Awesome. Same thing with here, whenever Captain America, this is like a cover, but Captain America is fighting Weapon H. Weapon H is slamming his giant Hulk adamantium claws on his shield. Awesome shot. Again, good speed, impact, and weight. In the World War Hulk storyline, Hulk fights Hercules. And that fight was really good, because again, it's the same thing that I'm talking about here, where it feels like two titans slugging it out. I think if you compare it to some manga panels, it probably doesn't hold up as well, because again, it still suffers from the same things where it's like, hey, we're doing some posing, you want a cool looking shot rather than something that's like dynamic or action packed. But as far as comic book action goes, it's up there. It's very good. This Despero shot where he's gut checking Martian Manhunter, I like a lot. And the Superman versus Doomsday fight, one of the most iconic fights in comics, I think does a good job of showing because this was the 90s as well, right? Where action and everything was at its peak. And you can see here exactly what I'm talking about, of how it's a lot of posing and just like, these angles that these characters are taking with, all elbows and knees pretty much. But it's good to the degree that it could have been good at the time. But it's certainly nowhere near as dynamic and fluid and action-packed as some other stuff. But I wouldn't say that it's bad. I think it's similar to, again, Jim Gordon's fight against Flass, where there's a narrative purpose there. Obviously, the narrative here is more focused on defeating the villain than any sort of like plot-based thing or story structure type thing. So it is a little bit different, but I would not say that it's bad. Similarly, I like this shot here of like Sentry fighting the Hulk, which is very good. Ties into, again, what I'm saying about you're feeling a lot of weight. And modern comic book action, everybody talks about like Donny Cates' writing, whether that's his like King Venom storyline or like the Thor Herald of Thunder storyline type of thing. And Donny Cates, when he writes, he does a good job of scale, I will say, like Thor fighting Galactus, Venom fighting Null. There's good scale there, and overall is pretty good. I do want to clarify, I know I've been pretty negative on comic books, but first and foremost, I am a comic book fan. I do love comic books. Nothing that I'm putting out here I think is like necessarily terrible or telling of like the downfall of the medium or anything. I just think that due to its more narrative structure, and I think it's more realistic drawings, or at least trying to get a more realistic, like anatomically correct style, that you're just naturally going to get more of that. More of the posing, more of the text on screen, stuff like that. So I don't want to sound too harsh that like I hate comics or anything, but I just think in pure action, they are a bit lackluster at times. And then here I'll have just some other shots that I like, that I think are not bad, and who do action well enough in a comic book way. And now with all that said, I want to look at some manga examples, because I've been hyping up manga action. Let's look at some examples of what I'm talking about there. So this is from Dragon Ball, right? This is Piccolo getting hit with a special beam cannon, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. This whole hit is taking up one page, though it's multiple panels. Great expression on his face as he sees it coming. It's coming towards him. It hits him. Big panel, he's getting hit. Then we see two more post-hit shots. So we see we see him get hit like 5 different times essentially. From his expression to the beam to getting hit to another expression of him getting hit to it passing through him. It's like that is impactful. You feel it versus it just being one panel of him getting hit. You're seeing it multiple times. And again, great expression. This is one where we've got Luffy in his Gear 4 crushing Kaido's head to the ground. And there's a lot of good Luffy versus Kaido shots. I like this one because, again, this is a good sense of scale where a little old Luffy punching Kaido's head into the ground, and this is part of quite a big fight. But again, you have your whole background here. At the top, we've got the clouds, right? So there's not a lot going on. But a very detailed foreground where we're seeing these buildings get shattered. We're seeing the result of this massive attack. Stuff like this, again, is fantastic. I think this is Jujutsu Kaisen. Don't hold me to that. I don't know. Where this guy's getting flung. Look at that perspective shift from his foot here to actually throwing the guy. Great perspective. Great foreground, background. Extremely detailed. We see the shockwaves of the ground shattering with his throw. We see the speed lines getting a real sense of fast motion, right? Done extremely well. And you do not see shots like this in comic books, period. This is another great one. Now, the background here is kind of sparse, I do admit. We've got a good foreground go. This is Naruto beating Neji early on in the Naruto series. But again, we see the shot, big shot here, taking up most of the panel, where he's uppercutting Neji. We see his expression. We see Naruto's expression. We see him leaving the ground, right? It's telling a story in one page without a bunch of dialogue crap being like, I hit him with everything I had. I would become the Hokage. No, it's just the shot speaking for itself. And of course, you can't talk about action in manga without talking about One Punch Man. Again, when you talk about scale and display of power, nobody does it better than One Punch Man, I would say. From this shot here, again, great perspective, great speed, a good sense of power coming here, splitting the clouds of the earth. We've got whenever their two fists collide, him and Cosmic Garo's fists collide, the power that causes, the beam shooting off, splitting like a hole in space, essentially deleting hundreds potentially of star systems. And again, there's not a dialogue box saying hundreds of stars were extinguished with a single blow. Like, it just shows it. It doesn't have a bunch of crap. And there is dialogue on this page, but it's not about this. It's about like what happened to the characters. They disappeared. Setting up right the next scene. It's not about like trying to end some narrative or tell some story. It's showing rather than telling. It's really as simple as that. Also, whenever Saitama is tearing up that moon of Jupiter, awesome scene, great sense of scale, incredible detail, again, not getting lost. It's not covered in dialogue crap. And again, talking about how the fights serve the narrative, right? Like, the action scenes are the narrative. you've got this shot here. If you've seen Vinland Saga, if you read Vinland Saga, you know what this is. But whenever the Vikings are carrying the boats on land to go siege this kingdom, like, that is an awesome action scene that doesn't require a ton of dialogue. You're just witnessing something awesome happen on screen. Like, that is the plot, is that they're taking this place over and they're doing it in this cool creative way. That's what's important, not some story of like, there was a legend in my town about a man. Like, all of that's gone. It's like, we're not talking about any of that crap. We're not filling the space with unnecessary junk. We're just going to tell this really cool story. Same thing's very true of Vagabond. Now, I've talked about Vagabond a few times. It is my favorite thing I've ever read. I think the art is the greatest art of anything that I've ever read. The story is the greatest story of anything that I've ever read. I've read like 5,400 pages of Vagabond. It's a long series. It's not over yet. But this does the best of kind of what I'm talking about. And this isn't like huge bombastic action like Goku fighting whoever he's fighting, right? This is a lot more grounded, but it does the same thing of big shots having priority on the page. And then you see multiple cuts of the aftermath, the character's expression, our character's expression, the results of this fight. Because most fights are handled in like one swing of his sword, but there's a good build up to this fight. The narrative is surrounding him being stronger than his opponents. And so there's a good tense motion coming into this because it is very lethal. You could get hurt at any moment. You could die from a single strike. And Musashi, our main character here, winning the fight, defeating his opponent, is the resolution. Now, this one is more narrative focused than most of the manga that we've discussed here. The narrative is a very strong part, but the narrative steps are reached and built upon by his action, right? By him defeating these opponents and seeking to grow stronger and stronger. Versus in comic books, a lot of time, it's like the narrative is just like the Earth is under attack. The city is under attack. Darkseid wants to enslave the universe. Like this huge scale, again, like a soap opera, this huge dramatic scale. And they have to go fight him and beat him. But they barely show any cool action. Just a ton of posing. Then Superman gives some speech and saves the day. Where it's like, you know, what was the point of what I just read? There's a million stories like that. And manga does benefit from usually having one story with one creator, right? One Piece, you look something like that. One story, one creator that can build on itself. And so the story is, for the most part, unique. There are similar tropes across a lot of these popular manga, but for the most part, they can be unique. Versus comics are kind of oversaturated. There's, millions of comics by different like just Superman alone. How many different writers, creators for Superman have there been? Where he's done everything, he's seen everything, and it's hard to get actual good action with the way that things currently are. Now, not all manga action is great, right? Obviously, we know this, but the bad manga action, which One Punch Man has bad manga action, like some bad shots if you ask me, but the bad shots from manga are just like normal shots from a regular comic book. Like at their worst, they're just like a normal comic book action scene, which is pretty funny. So in conclusion to all this, because I've been going on for a long time, my problem with comic book action, even though whenever you think of comic books, action is one of the first things you think about. The problem is that it's not dynamic. It's not very fluid or fast, where you don't feel the impact, you don't feel the scale and scope a lot of the times for what you're seeing. A lot of it is very narrative focused, where the action is just advancing the plot. It is not the main focus. The main focus is the story being told, the writer's story being told, and the action itself ends up looking kind of boring and bland because it's just a lot of posing and looking nice and cool with good anatomy, but just posing in place. Versus manga, a lot of times the action is the story, and good action scenes conclude the story emotionally. You don't need a lot of clutter from different dialogue or thought boxes or something. You can just show good, fluid, dynamic action that's taking up the page, multiple pages, and you really feel the scope, scale, and impact of the action a lot more. So, in my opinion, manga action is definitely better. I think that's what you think of whenever you think of these properties, is the fight scenes. From Goku to Naruto to Luffy, you think of the fight scenes And the narrative story may not be as good as some of the best comic books like Dark Knight Returns or Watchmen or something like that, but the action is definitely there, where for comics, like I'm saying, it is more narrative focused. So let me know what you guys think. What is your opinion on everything that I talked about here? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.